Scientifically speaking, we are able to showcase that the brain's main job is not just to calculate and process information and sort of be reactive towards its environment, but it is also to be proactive in that it is able to process a lot of information such that it is able to some extent, predict and or guess what is about to happen or what might be happening in its environment, such that it would make us be more proactive and more alert, if you will, of the environment we're in. And some people call that intuition, some people call it gut feeling, and no matter what we choose to call it, scientifically speaking, we are able to showcase more and more that this capability of the brain is because by its nature, it is built to process a lot of information, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, and as a result, it's part of its job is also to predict what is about to happen, or it's guessing what might be happening. And again, some call it intuition or gut feeling. So today we're going to discuss one of those papers that talk about this, and I'll, as always, add the link to the paper here. And the reason this is very interesting is because this is based on scientific peer-reviewed papers about biosignals and their nature of being a predictor of what might happen. And so I'm going to also try to connect that to the biosignals, other biosignals that we have in our bodies, such as heart rate variability, and all the other biomarkers that we have within the biological entities, so to speak. So this paper explores how the brain's ability to predict and regulate itself evolved over time. The researchers here argue that the mechanisms that our brains use for predictive processing and active inferences did not suddenly appear in complex animals like humans, for example. Instead, they gradually developed from simpler systems that already existed earlier in earlier life forms. So the central idea here is that the brain's main job is not just to react to the world, but to predict what will happen next and act in ways that minimizes surprise and or uncertainty for the individual. Over millions of years, this predictive ability became more advanced, giving rise to the complex forms of thoughts, perception, and behavior as we see it today. Predictive processing is the idea that the brain constantly makes guesses about what it expects to sense and or experience next. When the actual sensory input matches the brain's prediction, everything feels then normal. When it does not match, on the other hand, the brain experiences prediction error and updates its beliefs or actions in order to reduce that error. For example, if we reach for a cup and expect it to be heavy, but it is light, then our brain detects a mismatch and quickly adjusts its grip and expectation of the weight of the cup. On the other hand, active inference builds upon predictive processing. It says that the brain does not passively wait for information, but it actively moves and takes actions to confirm or improve its predictions. In other words, perception and action are deeply linked with one another. The brain predicts what it expects to perceive and then act in ways that makes those predictions come true. For example, when we turn our head, for example, to look at something, our movement helps our brain reduce uncertainty about what it is in the environment that we're trying to look at. These researchers describe evolution as a gradual improvement of these predictive mechanisms. Early organisms, for example, already had basic control systems that help them maintain internal balance, such as regulating temperature or regulating their blood sugar. So these are examples of homeostasis, the process of keeping the internal state stable, for example. But over time, these simple feedback loops evolved into more flexible and intelligent systems that could predict rather than merely react to the environment. According to these researchers, brain evolution can be understood as the progressive development of generative models, which are the internal models that allow an organism to simulate, to predict what will happen in the world around it. Now, over so many hundreds of thousands of years of evolution of the brain, the generative model, the role of it within the brain, is like the brain's internal simulation engine. It predicts what should happen next based on prior experiences and prior sensory inputs. Simpler animals, for example, might have a very shallow models that predict only immediate changes in the body or in the environment. But more complex animals, such as us, or mammals for that matter, have deeper generative models that can simulate different scenarios, predict other agents' actions within the environment, and plan accordingly ahead of time. And this paper thus explains that as evolution progressed, these generative models gained both breadth and depth per se. Now, why does the ability of the brain of the mammals, and in this case humans, matter for it to be able to predict, be a predictive machine, so to speak? So the ability to predict gives organism a very huge advantage. Instead of reacting after, for example, something happens, predictions allows us to prepare and adapt proactively, especially when might be danger involved. And so this reduces the energy costs, prevents the harm to the individual, and increases the chance of survival. For example, a lizard that predicts the movement of a predator can escape earlier, or a mammal that predicts when food will be scarce can store energy in advance. So there is a difference between these type of mammals and animals in the nature. And over time, the nervous system then favored the mechanisms that could model the environment around the animals and also humans more accurately in order to anticipate outcomes of the environment and the surrounding. These authors also suggest that even advanced form of human cognition, such as planning, imagination, and self-reflection, are extensions of these early predictive loops. Our thoughts are like internal stimulation that allow us to explore possible actions and outcomes before committing to them. So the same basic mechanism that helps a frog catch a fly, for example, also underlies the human abstract thinking that there's a difference that lies in complexity and the depth of the prediction itself. Now, how can we connect neuroscience to evolution? In this case, these authors bridge neuroscience and evolutionary biology in that they propose that studying predictive processing across species helps us understand how brain diversified and why they share common principles. Even though different animals have different brain shapes and different brain sizes, the underlying logic of predictive control appears to be universal. This unified framework can also help explain why, for example, disorders such as anxiety or schizophrenia might arise from disruptions in predictive coding, because these conditions involve errors in how the brain anticipates and interprets sensory signals. And so, in summary, the predictive processing and active inference are not unique to humans. They are the result of long evolutionary process that started with simple reflexes and homeostasis. The brain's architecture evolved gradually by adding layers of predictive control that became more and more flexible and hierarchical. These changes gave rise to complex behavior, perception, planning, and ultimately cognition. The same principles that help simple organisms regulate their internal state still underpin human intelligence and consciousness today, with the exception of the huge evolutionary and evolving cognitive processing that you and I are experiencing today. By the same token that we're talking about the brain's capacity to process a lot of information in order to be able to predict what it's about to happen, we have also noticed the same thing in other biomarkers and other biosignals, especially within the human being. And in this case, heart rate is one of them, and heart rate variability, to be very specific. And so there is a difference between the variation and the very subtle nuances in terms of changes in heartbeat and or heart rate variability, in this case HRV, that also has shown scientifically some type of a nuance changes in it when they and or if individuals undergo, for example, a process of trying to predict what might be happening in their immediate future, so to speak, in terms of what they think might happen in their immediate environment and immediate future. And this is also something that we've talked about in this channel in previously, in that we might call it intuition or gut feeling and whatnot, but in actuality, scientifically speaking, we are learning more and more that it has to do much more about how our brain and our body processes information to increase our chances of survival within our environment, more than just a sort of a hocus pocus way of thinking there is something like spiritual about it. It's very scientifically being established, so to speak. We still have a lot to learn, but that is how science works. We start small and then we just gradually expand on it. And so there have been studies that started in the 70s where they looked at, for example, electrical activities of the brain, aka EEG, as well as electrical activities of the heart, aka heart rate and heart rate variability, that also showed to some extent the various nuances that changed within the EEG and or HRV that showed that there was some type of a predictive analysis that was happening within the brain and the heart. And these papers, some of them we have covered in the past, but essentially at the physiological level, we do have some evidence that these biosignals to some extent change, and we've been able to some extent prove that it is because those predictive analyses are happening within the brain, and we can mark them because these biomarkers are changing. So to sum up, the predictive coding theory says that the brain is a prediction machine in order to minimize surprises and maximize its survival and evolution. Whereas the active inference extends this to the whole body, such as not only the brain, but also the heart and the rest of the body per se, in order to continuously gather information, make some prediction about its environment in order to increase its survival and increase its evolution capabilities. The papers that I mentioned that started back in 70s, some parts of it are not, at least they don't sound very scientific, and we haven't been able to sort of replicate, and so we do need to be cautious about when we do research. And so those are the parts that at least in this channel we don't focus on, but there are parts that are we've been able to replicate, and they are quite scientifically proven. And part of it is the peer-reviewed paper that I discovered here today. And so our job as a scientist, of course, when we do lit review, is to look at what has been done in the past and then take the parts that are we're able to replicate and they are very scientifically proven. I've gone through the rigorous process of scientific work and then built upon on that. So that's basically what we're doing. And so part of it is, again, is that there have been coverage in the biomarkers, biosignals such as EEG, as well as the body biosignals such as heart rate and HRV and other biomarkers as well. And so there are a lot of things to be learned from these biosignals. And tying back all of these type of work into the symbiotic intelligence is that there are ways for us to connect the biological signals into the or biological signals from biological systems into the artificial systems. And that is where a lot of the scientific work lies. And again, it's very interesting. If you're interested in the paper, feel free to read it as a whole. There's a lot of information, and they also have a lot of great paper that have a reference in their reference part of the paper. Yeah, very fascinating stuff. I hope you liked today's video, and thanks again for all your likes and comments, and I'll see you guys later.